afternoon or evening. I'm Fred Prack, and I'd like to thank Steve Kim and the Ever Young Life Canada for allowing me to be here to talk to you today. I thought that maybe we could talk about the mind and the brain a bit, because they're an intimate part of our lives, and most people don't know much about them. We just drive the car. We don't worry about the mechanics of it. And what I like to do is give you a little smattering of context for what I'm going to talk about and what you can do to help. There are a lot of people who have problems with thinking, and the thoughts are going through their mind all day long, and often unpleasant thoughts, thoughts that they don't really want to have. And that's a problem. I mean, it can interfere with sleep and all kinds of things. There is a huge amount of information coming to us every day through the senses. The basic idea is that all the thoughts and everything we experience, in fact, everything in the universe, is driven by energy. And it's the energy that determines how imposing the thoughts are, or the emotions are. If we're angry about something, but there's only a little bit of energy, then we might just be a little miffed or irritated. But if there's a tsunami of energy, then we just get carried away on a flood. And we can say and do things that we later regret, but they're already out there, and so it's too late. We get stressed by all kinds of things. And there are two kinds of stress. There's eustress and there's distress. And the body has a certain amount of flexibility. And if the stress is within the range of flexibility, then it's not a problem, and actually we get stronger by experiencing it. If it's beyond our range of flexibility, then it's distress, and we're distressed. And there can be changes happening on all levels of what we are that distort our ability to live our lives. An example is a metal ruler. If you get a metal ruler, you can whip it back and forth, and it's flexible, and it springs back to the normal position every time you bend it over. If it gets really whacked and it gets bent to the point that's beyond what the engineers call the coefficient of resilience, in other words, farther than it can flex, it gets kinked, and it's a permanent thing. And you can hit it with a hammer and everything, but it just never comes out completely. Fortunately, we're living matter, and unlike the steel ruler, we can come back almost to any stress that happens to us. You know, if we happen to lose a leg or something, then maybe not, unless we're a chameleon. But generally speaking, the body will bring us back to normal. And if it can't do that, it will compensate with scar tissue and all kinds of things to get us back to function. We get guidance in our lives. Children are taught not to do this, and this is a good thing, and you get a pat in the head if you're the child. My parents, it was a long time ago, played a game every time there was a birthday or a holiday where there were presents given, where they'd hide usually the best present somewhere on the property or in the house, and you'd have to go and find it. And the only hints that they would give is saying warmer, warmer if you're going towards it, and colder, colder if you're going away from it. And if you were going far away, they'd say you're freezing. Right? So our emotions are that game. That dawned on me one day when I was playing it when I was quite young, that the emotions I really like, the happy, joyous, loving emotions, are warmer, 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 very warm. And the anger, fear, resentment is cold. Rage is ice. So we have that as guidance in our lives, but hardly anybody thinks about that. We like to have the good feelings, and we don't like to have the bad feelings, but we don't do anything about it to create that. And our emotions are basically information. So the information is about the situation in the world and what we do in the world and how the world is in that moment. And again, the amount of energy drives that experience. So if there's a lot of emotion, if, for instance, the anger is really strong, then that means there's just a lot of energy. So if we can handle the energy, then we're in good shape. And we're not really taught how to be in charge of most of the energy around anger. It seems like parents are scared of a 2-year-old's anger, and so they're not allowed to be angry, especially at the parents. We can learn how to suck our thumb in the womb. That's controlling muscles and controlling energy. We can learn to crawl and walk and ride a bike and drive a car and eat with a spoon and then a fork and all kinds of things. And we learn to do those because they're acceptable. And we're encouraged to control the energy that way. But if it's anger, we suppress it and try to block the energy. But what happens if we do that is that, like in a car, either the gas pedal is right to the floor or the brake is on full. And so there was no learning involved for the body, the intelligence, to figure out what we need for the situation. And for emotions, we think that energy and the body's response are conflated. So the body produces energy in response to how we think. And the more the survival situation is, the more energy is produced. And so we can sit down and have dinner, right? But if we're going to be dinner for a mountain lion, we'll have a different amount of energy to get away or do whatever we need to do to survive it. The thing is that energy and the body's response is taken as the emotion. Whereas, for instance, fear is the body's response is the fight or flight, and that's what the energy is for, to either confront whatever it is and deal with it or run away from it. And it goes one step further, it constricts the focus of awareness so that when we see something that's a scary situation, we know what's scary about it. So we can see the mountain lion running towards us, and everything else is disappearing in the background, because that's the most important thing we have to deal with. And then if we're pretty good, we can see some options. That happens with anxiety, right? The anxiety is a fear, a form of fear, but we don't know what the cause is, and we don't know what the response is. So we have this very sort of nebulous, overwhelming anxiety about the situation. And right now there are a lot of people, in the last 2 years, there are a lot of people that have been having free-floating anxiety about COVID and all the things that can happen and all the things that they say are going to happen and all the vaccines and masks, and some people are very upset by it. And that's reasonable, because we can't see the virus. It's invisible to our eyes. And we're told about, for instance, long-term effects of COVID. For some people who have really mild symptoms when they get it, the symptoms can go on for ages and ages, months, and like with other viruses in the past, people have had the symptoms for years sometimes. So there are things to be anxious about, for sure. The important thing is that we understand what makes us overwhelmed by the experience, and that's the amount of energy that's involved. So if we can handle the energy, then we can be in charge of what we're experiencing. And there are a lot of people, especially since COVID, that have a great deal of difficulty with insomnia. And that is usually because there's just too much energy. And if we're afraid, then the membrane structure in the body, the fascia, tightens up. And the membrane is the medium for energy flow in the body. And if it tightens up, it acts like a garden hose nozzle. So the energy will go through that area faster and harder and keep us up at the surface. And then we think about, oh my God, I've got so much to do tomorrow. And that tightens the fascia up even more, and then we're more up on the surface, and we can't get the sleep. There was a person who, a friend of mine, who complained that her husband had Alzheimer's, and he couldn't believe that she was his wife, and they'd been married for 45 years. And that was very upsetting. And she said, but I am your wife, it's me, Alice. And he said, you're not my wife, go away. And so that was very hurtful for her. And she was all upset because it happened that morning, and I saw her a little later. And I said, well, with the Alzheimer's, he has a problem with short-term memory. And he's not processing the moment, and hasn't been doing it for a while, and putting it into long-term memory. So he knows you're his wife, but he sees you probably as you were when you were 25. And she thought that was sort of okay, but it still took away, or didn't take away, what she was feeling because he didn't recognize her now. And there are all kinds of situations like that. We can have injuries to the head. We all know about shaking babies, and that can disrupt the function of the brain and actually damage the brain. And so can accidents. Whiplash can be a non-contact injury, but the brain can be quite damaged and interfere with personality and mobility and coordination and memory and all kinds of things. Way back, I remember a story about a fellow up in the Yukon, I think it was either late 1800s or early 1900s. And he was in charge of a crew that was dynamiting an open pit mine up in the Yukon. And they would drill holes into the rock and then put dynamite in and ignite the dynamite and blow the rock apart. But he was tamping the dynamite down into one of the holes. So I guess he tamped a little too hard, and the dynamite went off. And the steel bar that he was using, was a 2-inch steel bar to tamp it down, went up under his chin and out the top of his head, which is probably not a good experience. But he looked like he was dead, and you could see all the blood in the brains and everything. And so his crew was very upset, and they took him into town to the hospital. And halfway to town, he woke up, and he was very angry and upset, like, what's going on? And they had to explain to him that he'd had an accident. And his language was quite colorful when he was asking what's going on. And he survived it. And some people say he's the foundation of what we call neurology right now, in that he was the first person who was able to allow doctors and scientists to actually observe a living brain in action. So the big change was his personality from that accident. He was very angry, quite the opposite of how he'd been in life before the accident. He was congenial before and got along with all the men and everything, and he wasn't able to work with others and have relationships, except with the doctors who examined him and tested him. That opens up a whole idea of how the brain actually supports what we think. And what we think changes how the brain is. So, if we think about things that are stressful, then the brain has to recreate the stressful experiences. And the body intelligence seems to have, other than running the whole show inside, which we don't really have much of a part of, the body intelligence will re-experience whatever it was we're remembering, whatever the stressful situation is, or what we're imagining, and think it's happening now. So people have had accidents, or they've been in arguments with other people, and they think about it afterwards over and over and over, and things they should have said and all that. And the body is actually responding as though it were real and happening right in that moment. And the difficulty with that is that when the body is stressed, there's a lot of changes in the body, chemistry. There's something called cortisol, which is the big stress hormone. It's always there, but normally it's functioning to help balance the system. If the stress is chronic, in other words, if you've been stressed for a long period of time, then it starts to dominate, and it's a survival thing. And so one of the things it will do is break down tissues, healthy tissues, to absorb or take in the proteins to be used later in case we get injured in whatever the stress is, or if the stress itself is causing injury. And when that happens, we lose functioning sometimes if it's really severe. We have digestive problems because the digestive system is being attacked by the cortisol. The circulatory system, the hormones, and the worst of all is when the brain starts to be deteriorating because of the cortisol breaking down the brain tissue. So that's one of the things that we should avoid if we can. And if we understand this relationship between the mind and the body, and we see that goes on, that we rehash or revisit old stresses or old experiences that we didn't like, then we find that our bodies just get tighter and tighter and tighter. And I know there are some people that the best they can do is shuffle along with little tiny steps behind their walker, because their bodies are so tight, the hips can hardly move and the knees can hardly move. And they're afraid of falling down, which exacerbates the problem. They're afraid that they're not going to have money and they'll be out on the street, or they're going to die, or whatever it is. And it all just adds to the stress and the tension in the body, which impairs body function. If we have severe opinions about anything, if we today with the media, having opinions apparently is a good thing, and they're useful, but we have to be committed to our opinions. And the problem with that is that they're judgments, and they limit our perception of the world and about whatever it is we're engaging with. The more information we have about anything, the more appropriately we can respond to the situation. If we cut out a whole chunk of that because we have an opinion that this is no good, then we don't get to respond to it with as much depth and flexibility, as much resources as we have, because we're not getting information where it's needed. There is information coming to us on every level. So what we experience of the world through our senses is a huge amount of data. That if we had to deal with it all, we'd be totally overwhelmed. So we do something that's quite creative. We categorize, we chunk things up and put them in little boxes. So we can see things all at once, but as a category. So if I see a dog walking across the street, I know it's a dog. I don't have to go to Google. I know it's a dog. Right? And that's a category for all those furry, four-legged folks. And if I want to go further, I can look at it and find out if it fits smaller categories, like is it a Great Dane or is it a Chihuahua? I mean, that's pretty obvious. I probably would know that immediately. But those are smaller categories. And then is it male or female? And is it long hair or short hair? And so on and so on. And we do that with everything. The more interested we are in it, the more refined our perception becomes, and the more information we gather about that particular thing. Which is why medicine has all these specialties now. It used to be that the general practitioner did everything, and knew about everything, and knew your history, and knew your family, and all of that. And now, your GP will take care of some things, but refer you to specialists if it's considered beyond his range of possibility. When our memory is impaired because we're so stressed, then we also can't deal with the perception of information about situations that we're in. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, the energy in the memories is so strong and so intense that the body and the individual can't discern that what they're experiencing is the memory, or actually what's happening now in front of them. And that becomes really difficult for some people because they're going between two realities. One of the things that we can do to help ourselves, and some of you may do this already, but journaling is very effective. If we write down all the things that upset us, and the good things too, but the things that are upsetting, if we write them down, they seem to get concretized. The body seems to accept that it's going to be there if you look at it again, and doesn't have to keep reminding you about the stress of the situation. There's the body mind and there's the ego mind, and we identify with the ego mind. And body mind, like I said, it runs this hugely complicated physiology that we have, including everything in the brain. Ego mind thinks symbolically and can solve problems really well. So the main job of the ego mind is to solve problems. With journaling, you want to get down the details of the situation of what you're experiencing during the day. The more the better, but if you can't remember, then that's fine too. But stuff that you'd like to get down is what you experienced, of course, and how long it lasted, and how did it affect you, how did it change your day, did it affect those around you, and how did it affect the people that are really important to you, and how long did it affect them. Your body doesn't forget anything, so it's going to be there. But if you write it down, then your body will accept that. It may take a little while for the body to figure out that you're actually doing that, but what we need to do is not block the upsetting, stressful memories, but create new ones that are positive, that are uplifting, that are the warmer part of the equation. Have the idea of the cortisone affecting us. If we have those continuing stresses, and that can really be detrimental to everything about our lives. If we know that, then it's worth our while to try and change it a little bit and just redirect some of the energy to the positive things. What I said about remembering something and the same pattern of activity needs to happen to remember something as happened when you were having the original experience. Well, every time you do that, that pattern gets stronger. And the nerve cells involved will fire more easily the more that connection is happening. So what we need to do is create another channel for those nerve impulses, for that energy to go. And by just adding the things that made us very happy during the day, or were pleasant, or where we felt really relaxed, that's a good thing. And that reinforces that in our mind. The important thing is that we have the appreciation of what we're actually participating in our lives in this moment, in this time. And if we can do that, then we can actually start to make choices that are good for us instead of just being carried along with what's happening without knowing what's going on. So with that, I'd like to wish you all good health and happiness, and thank you for listening.